Tonight, some new areas of interest to talk about around the tropics. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for July 23rd. So, on the main overview, we've still got the rather hopeless remnants of Estelle, which, to be honest, probably shouldn't really deserve a map icon at all, but nothing else has formed yet, so generally we're still looking at a blank map, but a few areas of interest have now caught our eye. However, it's not in the Atlantic. No areas of interest still for the next 5 days on day 53 of hurricane season, although there is one or two little signals starting to appear from the eastern Atlantic near the coast of Africa next week. In the eastern Pacific, it's day 70 of hurricane season now. Estelle is still traceable but looking appalling, and now we've marked a 40% area of interest, which looks like it's going to become the dominant system as we enter next week, which will move through the eastern Pacific. We'll highlight that in more detail later. In the western Pacific, we've now marked the area of interest that we've been looking at on the GFS model, particularly, that we didn't think was going to form. Well, now we're saying it's a non-zero chance at 20%. It still shouldn't form as it heads towards Japan. In the southern Indian Ocean, we have now marked an area of interest that we were expecting to put up sooner or later in the South Indian Ocean at 20%. So that would be a surprise if that did form, but it has happened before, most notably, or once, on the On This Day feature that we had yesterday. Anyway, let's take a look at satellite imagery right now across the Atlantic, and as you can see, a nice little area of rotation there off the coast of Hispaniola, but it's not a tropical cyclone or has the chance to be anything like. And we have a lot of thunderstorms brewing across Central America, across Cuba, into the southern United States as well. And looking at the eastern Pacific, you can see the two areas of interest there. The one that's further out to sea, the National Hurricane Center have 10% on. That was the one that was initially designated a few days ago that we've given up on now. And the other one, which is just moving off the coast of Central America, I don't think that's the one that's going to form either. I think it's a little bit further back, although I'm not actually sure. It is just on the coast of Central America, near the coast of Costa Rica, so it might come fully out of the influence of that system, or it's a bit of a confusing picture. It might even come from something further behind. But this is the latest satellite imagery of all of that chaos going on in the eastern Pacific. In short, it's just a lot of rainstorms that are occurring right now in that region in Central America. I doubt they need more rainfall after the start that we've had to the season, which has produced a lot of rain in these areas, but there it is, and some thunderstorms also in western Mexico. Western Pacific looks like this, and you can see there was some rotation going off further north, and now it's transferred further south with that massive band trying to develop into something, and that's what we have marked right now, just off the Northern Mariana Islands, just south of the Ogasawara island chain of Japan, and that's going to start to steam northwards shortly. And in the Indian Ocean, signs of that system developing. Well, I don't think it's that one there, although maybe it is actually. I'm not quite sure. We'll check in on the models and see what the GFS thinks about that shortly. North Indian Ocean, a lot of monsoonal stuff going on there. And in the southern hemisphere off the coast of Australia, decent looking frontal system moving off through the Coral Sea towards New Zealand, which will probably dump quite a bit more precipitation. I think they've had a lot of that recently, and pretty cool temperatures from what I've been seeing, and on the east coast of Australia. Well then, global sea surface temperatures look like this, still rather warm along the western coast of Mexico, although you can quite clearly see the cold trail from recent tropical cyclones in the eastern Pacific, which will make it more difficult if they keep following that same path. In the Atlantic, getting very warm in the Gulf of Mexico, 30 degrees plus, and it's still warming up there. The Gulf Stream, quite impressed with that as well, 30 degrees plus, extending all the way up to the same latitude as probably Savannah, Georgia by now, and 28 degree isotherm extending as far north as the Delmarva Peninsula in the same latitude. Indian Ocean is looking fairly warm, pushing 30 degrees in one or two spots. Western Pacific pushing 30 degrees in many locations there. Philippine Sea obviously remains the hot spot, but in the East China Sea and the South China Sea, I suppose, we are looking at very warm temperatures that are above average, and that will favour tropical cyclones that enter the East China Sea in particular, because they always tend to struggle when they end up in there a little bit. But I would watch that area very closely. And along Japan as well, very warm sea surface temperatures north of the islands, not as much south of, but still noticeable. The La Nina effect in the central part of the Pacific there, and in the east a little bit still, but generally hit and miss in the Eastern Pacific. The Atlantic above average, and you can see here the Caribbean oceanic heat content is spreading massively in the last few days. Lots of oranges across most of the Caribbean Sea now and the Gulf of Mexico. Western Pacific's looking very good for oceanic heat content as well, as you'd expect. Eastern Pacific picking up just a little bit off its flatline start, particularly further east, but I don't think storms are really going to feel it that much. First thing that we're going to look at on tonight's GFS run is the Atlantic, the Eastern Atlantic, and you can see an area of energy there starting to rotate off the Cape Verde Islands, and then it loses itself again, and then you can see something else trying to form there, whether it's the same energy or not. There you can see that initial one which curves round the islands, east to north to west, and then eventually you'll see that other system forming southwest of the Cape Verde Islands, a more traditional area to form, and might do something later on. Eastern Pacific, you can still trace Estelle's remnants for quite some time through that run, and then you start to see the next system forming, a small tropical cyclone if it occurs according to the GFS at least, and then a rather low latitude as well compared to the other storms that we've had so far. Just watch again to see where it forms from. I think it is from the initial system we are currently looking at off the coast of Central America, but the southern part of it, its energy will transfer into this potential tropical cyclone. Western Pacific, let's watch this then right now. There's that system that we're talking about, and there it is moving northwards, shifting northwards there and affecting the coast of Japan. It doesn't look like it quite gets a tropical cyclone status at any point during that, and then behind that we get what I like to call the end of July, the August slop season in the Western Pacific, where we get loads of usually large systems trying to become tropical cyclones all at similar times, and it just doesn't really work. And there it is trying to get typhoon force winds whilst not having gale force winds around its center. And this is the southern hemisphere. Look out for this system that forms, and there it is trying to do so. That's only on the 26th, so what we're looking at right now on that satellite imagery isn't what we're expecting to happen soon, even though it's looking decent in itself. But then take a look, it comes from nothing really in that general area, gradual movement towards the southeast. Is it a bona fide tropical cyclone on that forecast run? Well, it's a close one. I think the answer's still no on that within the 5-day period. Let's look at longer range at the Atlantic, and you can see that system becoming a probable tropical cyclone, although that is in the longer range according to the GFS, and it's usually wrong in the Atlantic, let's face it. And what's left of its energy continues as a wave, I suppose, degenerating into it, or a disturbance, just north of the Lesser Antilles and the Greater Antilles, and eventually probably moving on into Cuba and then into the Gulf of Mexico. But if anything did form out of that, it would be a short-lived system. Eastern Pacific following that second system, the one that's currently at 40%, and another one behind it starts to form towards the end of the month there, and both of them eventually become significant hurricanes. You can see that first one probably category 3 or 4 on that model run, that's day 5 to 10. The second one there looks like it becomes category 2 right at the end of that 10-day period. Just looking in the Atlantic as well, I think, was it on this one or is it in the long range? I think it's in the long range that we might see a little system up there. And now let's take a look at the Western Pacific again. There's that second system that happens much later on, becoming a tropical storm and stalling off the coast of Japan near Tokyo. So that'll be something to witness, but GFS has been throwing up differing scenarios that stall storms anywhere from Japan to Okinawa to the coast of China. So whether that happens at all or not is still a big ask, but if it did, then if a storm formed in the first place, then its track might be erratic, as you can clearly see. Indian Ocean, check out this again, the South Indian, that system there eventually becomes a tropical cyclone by the looks of it, but then the North Indian Ocean, look at that, tries to form a category 1 cyclone there before striking India, making landfall on the 1st or the 2nd of August, which would be really surreal if that was to occur. It is the absolute dead time of the year, particularly further south in the Bay of Bengal, but it is trending closer and closer to the 5-day period. What are we going to do with ourselves if that becomes a possibility? Anyway, that's the important stuff done and dusted. You can take a look at our merch store by scanning that barcode and taking a look at what we've got there. You can also request animations and still waiting for Hone t-shirts, which I'm sure everyone likes. Something like that. Check the Scilly range then, and this is what the Eastern Pacific has in the long run. Those 2 hurricanes there moving through. Now look at the Atlantic, a little pop-up system there in the Gulf of Mexico on the 5th or the 6th of August, moving into southern Texas. Once again, that is extremely small, it's very far out, it's a weak system. I would not put any stock into that, so don't sound your horns about tropical cyclones in Texas or anything like that. That is a distinct improbability. And 2 systems moving on the Eastern Pacific there. Okay, the Western Pacific during this long range period as well, that disturbance lingers on as a remnant low, and then in the southern China Sea we start to see something else forming near Hainan and moving through there into the Gulf of Tonkin and briefly becoming typhoon there. Very ambitious, and right at the end of that run there, a massive low pressure system looks to try to develop into a tropical cyclone as well in the South China Sea, but once again that is extremely far out. That's around day 15, 16, and that first storm is day 12, 13 I think, so an extremely long way out for all of that. Well, on this day, on July 23rd, 2012, Typhoon Vicente was making landfall in southern China, very close to Macau, just to the west of there, as a Category 4, and it was a rapidly intensifying storm. I remember doing updates on that one, Category 1, and I think 6 hours later it was a Category 4, and I was required to do another update back then. That was my first full year of doing in fact, my first year at all of doing storm updates. My first full year was 2013. So that was Vicente on this day on July 23rd. Well then, around the world today, 10 years later, Danielle is next up on the Atlantic naming list. In the Eastern Pacific, it will be Frank. In the Central Pacific, we're still waiting for Hone. God help us if it gets to 10 years for that. In the Western Pacific, Songda is next up. In the North Indian Ocean, it'll be Sitrang trying to become the 37th storm of the year. And in the Southern Hemisphere, the Australian region, the next name there will be Darian. In the Southwest Indian Ocean, the first name on the next season's list is Ashley. And in the South Pacific, we'll be looking out for Harley. That's all for tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow night.